Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Mandy Tice. I'm the director of the School of Atelier Arts, and today we are going to continue with our lace painting exercise. Now, don't worry if you've missed the previous ones. They're all available on our YouTube channel, so please check that out at School of Atelier Arts. And today we're doing part 4 and hopefully the final part of this project. Please go ahead and say hello in the chat. I love hearing from everybody. And we will just kind of jump right into it. We have about an hour. Just to review a little bit of what we've done, we've matched some colors for an underpainting. We started paying more careful attention to shape. And today, really, we're going to work on the plays of warms and cools. So we kind of have this warmy, neutral undertone here, but what makes this feel like lace that this doesn't have yet is this play between the warm and the cool whites. So today our palette is the same palette we've been working with. So we have a titanium white, a cad yellow, cad red, ultramarine blue, and an ivory black. And I've talked about this at length in other videos, and please make sure to check out the other videos at the School of Atelier Arts. But white is not a color, okay? And actually, I have a great blog post on this at the School of Atelier Arts website as well. It's called Black and White Aren't Colors, and it really goes a deep dive. But for the brief bit today, titanium white is really a light value blue. So there's no such thing as white. White is just a really light value red, orange, yellow, green, blue, or purple. If you've ever heard like an interior designer in, the hardware store aisle being like, oh, I need a warm white, or oh, I need a cold white. What they're really acknowledging is that white isn't its own color. It's a light value. If they want a warm white, they're looking for a light value orange. If they want a cold white, they're looking for a light value blue, for example, or maybe a light value green. Um, so, there's really no such thing as white. And so this quote unquote white lace that we're painting isn't white either. It's a series of neutrals, slightly warmish whites with slightly colder whites. And this kind of play between the cold whites and the warm whites is what's really making this lace feel semi-transparent, making it feel, frothy, like we want our lace to feel. So good morning, Ellen. Good morning, Leola. So lovely to have you this morning. I love seeing everybody in the chat. It's always a delight. Good morning, Jessica. So happy to have you join us as well. Okay, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with a smaller brush because we're working on smaller areas. So you really want the proportion of your brush to justify the proportion of the space that you're trying to cover with your brush. You don't want to try to cover a big space with a little brush, and you don't want to try to cover a little space with a big brush. We want the right size brush for the right project. But today, because we're trying to get more specific in the lace, and we're working in smaller areas, I really want to use a smaller brush here. So normally I'd mix a color, but because we have such a warm underpainting here, and because we want this colder white on top, and my white happens to be cold out of the tube because I'm using a titanium white, which is a light value blue, I'm just going to see what the pure white looks like on our page here. So I'm just going to tuck you guys in nice and close here. Good morning. Good morning. Okay. I really love seeing everybody joining us. We have people from Facebook. We have people from Twitch. We have people from YouTube. It's such a delight to see everybody here today. So I'm going to just put a little bit of this cold white down, and I'm really happy with it. Do you see this play between this cold white and this warm white underneath it? Now, the technique that Velasca has used here, it's a little bit textured. So he's not using like thick, wet, juicy paint. He's using a little bit of a dry brush technique here because he's trying to let some of that warm underpainting shine through. So I'm also going to be using more of a dry brush technique. I don't have a ton of paint loaded here. I'm not putting a solid swipe down. I'm letting some of that warmth shine through because that's part of what's creating this nice play between warm and cools on the lace here. When you are dealing with really small increments of change as well, you want to be standing back. It seems counterintuitive, right? We're trying to see something really small, a really small change. But it's actually easier to see smaller changes from afar than it is up close. Our eyes can't really clock it very well when we're up close, but it becomes more obvious when we are further away. Another trick is to kind of squint our eyes. That's a really useful technique as well. So I'm going to be standing further back while I am going through this process of adding this colder white. And it's just a really subtle, beautiful thing that's kind of unifying with a little bit of a dry brush technique going on throughout this painting here. And I really want some of that warmth to shine through. Now, some people say, so this is a dry brush. Some people, you can make the argument that this is scumbling, like a calmer version of scumbling. You could even make the argument that I'm glazing, right? Glazing, it's really just painting thinly enough that what comes out from underneath it shines through it. And you can make the argument that scumbling is a form of a glaze. It's one way to get a subtler effect. Now, typically, I advocate for direct painting. So far, what we've done is direct painting, just trying to match the colors as best we can. And I really believe in direct painting, especially for students who are learning atelier training for the first time. In the online atelier painting bootcamp that I teach, I really focus on direct painting because it forces you to make a choice. When you're glazing, you can get like close enough and then just kind of glaze it, but you don't know exactly how to mix the exact colors. So in the online painting bootcamp, the online atelier that I teach, where I critique a couple times a week, I really focus on direct painting. But because we are doing a master copy and we are trying to learn from the artist, and this artist clearly used a scumbling technique, we're going to learn from our artist Velasquez today. Okay. All right. So again, I'm just using the scumbling technique. I'm letting some of what's underneath shine through. And I'm just trying to get this cold note to kind of unify this piece here before it transitions back into this warmth. And again, using the dry brush technique, it's one way to transition between a warm and a cool by just letting some of that warm shine through instead of mixing each one of these like we might in a direct painting method where we are mixing tile rows. I can't think of what the word I'm actually trying to think of is. When you mix up little piles, it has a name, and I can't think of what it's called up right now. I don't know if I'm thinking of it. It'll come to me and I'll shout it out here. Mixing little piles of paint to tile with. Okay, and we do have a little bit of warmth here. See, here we still have a little bit of scumbling, but it's getting a little warmer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix just a tiny bit of orange over here, just the slightest bit, and then I'm going to mix some white into it, and it's going to warm up my white. I need some, okay. So don't hesitate to ask any questions that you have in the chat. I love hearing from you. Even if you want to comment on the selection in the master copy, I'm a huge fan of Velasquez. I absolutely adore his work. I really think he was a unique mind in painting, way ahead of his time. So, you know, what we're really focused on today is this unique interplay between the warms and the cools. And even that neutral, it could warm up a little bit, that darker neutral. All right, so I'm mixing up what's called a chromatic neutral. So I'm using a little bit of yellow, red, and blue, and a little bit of white to just warm up this neutral here because there's a little bit, oh, that's too warm. Sometimes you go too far one way and too far the other way. You got to find your happy place. That's still way too warm. Look, look how warm I made that. Sometimes, sometimes we're big fat exaggerators as painters, right? Like, we get an idea in our head, like, oh, I want to make it warmer, but then we just like overplay it. It's also a little too dark here. There we go. So we're starting to get a warm neutral, but it's still a little aggressively warm. And it's a little dark. All right, we're starting to zero in on it a little bit cooler. And I see kind of the same happening over here. There's a little bit of a warm neutral coming. It's a little too warm. Let's cool it down a touch. And again, it's this play between warms and cools that we're really going after today. Using a little bit of a scumbling technique to knit it into what's underneath it. I want to be mindful of, some of these shapes as well behind here. Sometimes when things dry, especially when they're dark in colors, they can do something called sinking in. And because I painted this so long ago, this color has dried lighter than it probably was when I painted it. And so, by restating some of these notes in here, it's a way for us to make sure that we're fighting that sinking in situation. I'm also thinking about shape in here. And welcome, Lisa. So good to have you here. Oh, we have multiple Lisas. We have dueling Lisas in the chat. So if it's too warm, what are you adding to cool it down? Blue? So that's a great question. So I was working with my oranges, and because orange has red and yellow, if I want to cool it down more, I can add blue. If I add black, remember black is a really dark blue and it's more of a neutralized blue. So using black will both cool and neutralize. Using blue will just cool it, but it's more of a chromatic note here. So it'll pull it more blue. So that's a great question. And I actually used a little bit of both in there to cool it down, of both the black and the blue. So great question. Okay. All right. So I'm working a little bit on the shape here right now. I want to get this shape a little bit more accurate. This is kind of an abrupt transition here, and it's actually a little bit softer of a transition going, under the shadow area of the. And keep in mind too, this shadow over here is cooler than the shadow directly under here. There's almost a red undertone here. People, when they get into neutrals, they tend to make neutrals all this gray color, right? But there's such a thing as chromatic neutrals. Like this is dark, it's somewhat neutral, but it still has a red undertone in it. And these are the types of little things that students often miss when they start atelier training. And we want this nice transition from our warms to our cools. Sometimes things have to read two ways. Like I'm looking at this shape and I'm including this part in the light, but there's also an overlap where this little piece here is also in the shadow, right? So sometimes I'm thinking about the light shape and then sometimes I'm thinking about the shadow. And I have to think both ways. So I was just thinking about the light shape. I don't have enough of the shadow in here. So now I'm going to push back and darken just this area here, trying to get it to read both as a shadow and a light at the same time. I tell this to my students all the time in the online boot camp, but form runs in all ways, right? And sometimes we have competing shapes. Sometimes it gets really scary because students are like, no, this needs to be a white squarish shape here. Then other students will be like, no, the dark is more of the down, it needs to come down. But it's often multiple things that have to be true at the same time, right? It needs to be able to read both ways. And that's the tricky part. That's where the subtlety of painting comes in for many students. And so, do you see how I'm zeroing in on this idea that this white shape, in theory, could extend to here, but also the shadow could extend down? It has to read both ways. Okay. So a few questions in the chat. So I've heard cool lights, warm shadows for indoors, opposite for out. Oh, Ellen, this is such a good question. I'm so glad that you asked this. Okay. All right. I'm about to get on a soapbox, so listen up. All right. Um, there are subscriptions for, oh, all shadows are warm and all lights are cool, or vice versa if you're inside or you're outside. Those are prescriptions. Those are recipes. Sometimes those can be guidelines to help you look for something, but there's exceptions to everything, right? Like right now, this area that we're working over here, it's a warm shadow right next to a cold shadow, right? So if I were using some sort of formula of, oh, all my shadows have to be warm, I'd be warming this up over here and I would lose this play between the warm and the cool, which is what's giving it that luminosity and that slightly transparent vibe. So forget these rules, please. There's so much bad information out there, right? What is true is that depending on the circumstances, that all shadows can be either warm or cool, or in this case, both at the same time, right? We have a little bit of warmth right next to something cool. So please get these formulas out of your head. We all want formulas. We feel like they'll make things easier, but I don't believe in formulas. I believe in process. And my process for identifying isn't to come in being like, oh, all shadows have to be warm. My process that I teach in the online class, in which I hope I'm teaching you all through these streaming opportunities, is that the process is think about the value, the chroma, and the hue, right? So this is a middle value, slightly on the darker side. It's pretty neutralized, the chroma, and this part is more of an orange neutral than a blue neutral. That's the hue, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple are our hues, right? So if you think about shadows with that process, you'll always identify exactly what color they are. But if you go in with assumptions like, oh, shadows have to be warm, but this shadow looks blue, and then like your brain hurts because you're trying to like impose a formula that doesn't match what your eyes actually see. So I really, really encourage you to create processes for your painting that will work for you every time. Formulas there's always exceptions to formulas. Like I can't rant enough about, oh, the eyes are halfway in the head. Like that's such a lie. Like your head can tilt just a tiny bit and all of a sudden it's not true anymore, right? Or like the lips are at the center of the pupils. That's not true either, right? Some people have really, really wide mouths. Some people have like the skinniest little pursed mouths that you've ever seen. And if you try to like drop down lines from the pupils to force the mouth into a certain width, like that's insanity. Like use your eyes. That's what they're for, right? Now, that being said, sometimes we can have an ideal in our head, and then we can see how, a face we're looking at differentiates from that. So, like, let's say you have an ideal head where the mouth has the corners, going down from the pupils, that vertical line that sorry, I'm trying to show you. It's hard doing it in reverse, right? So my mouth happens to fit that characteristic, right? But lots of mouths do not. Many do not. But if you have an idealized figure, then you can see how it differs. So if you have the assumption that the mouth is the width of the pupils, then when you're drawing somebody, see if it's actually true. Don't assume it's true. Just use it as a guide. Like, oh, it's wider than the pupils. It's narrower than the pupils. Then you'll get an accurate likeness. But if you try to impose this generic face onto everybody you draw, you're going to get lots of drawings that look generic, but not like the person that you're trying to paint. I see I've hit a nerve a little bit in the chat. Um, oh, well, they said I don't know if I have ideal classical features, but, my mouth width is, in line. But, like, think about this too, like, if you're counting on the pupils, what a terrible landmark to count on, because even if I just look, like, towards this direction, all of a sudden my mouth doesn't line up, right? Because my pupils can move. So what a silly thing. If your eyes can look both ways, then it like your mouth isn't changing width. Like that's pretty set by your jaw, more or less. I guess when you smile, it gets wider. But okay, so if they're smiling, it's gonna be wider than if they're, pursed like this. Now all of a sudden the corners of my lips are nowhere near, you know? So it's like all relative. What's the expression of your model, right? So if anything, use it as an ideal and see how it differentiates. And I cover this extensively in the portrait worksheets that I have at the School of Atelier Arts website. So if this is something that's blowing your mind right now and you want ways of practicing that will actually help you identify what makes the features of the person you're drawing unique so you actually get a likeness, I encourage you to check those out. Leo is saying, I'm so glad you said that about drawing. I thought it was me. Yeah, there's so much bad information. And this is because realistic drawing and painting fell out of favor for the last 100 years, right? And little remnants of it persisted, but with people that didn't know their applications, right? Like, I can't tell you how many. I'm a licensed art teacher. I can't tell you how many art teacher textbooks talk about composition and they're like, oh, repetition. And they're like, red dot, green dot, red dot, green dot. But you know what real repetition is? What the old masters knew it to be is, this isn't all the same, but this repeating kind of zigzag here, that's repetition. Or kind of, do you see how this collar kind of has these flatnesses to it? And you see how the hair was painted with some flatness to it? That's not a mistake. That's intentional repetition. That's unifying compositionally this piece, right? So just as much as I can rant about facial feature placement rules, I can also rant about all these like rules about composition, which also aren't true. So I keep making these worksheet sets because I'm tired of these rules like confusing my students all the time when they aren't true. So if you want to learn about composition and why those rules are wrong, I have composition worksheets. If you want to learn about portraiture and how to actually identify making an accurate portrait, check out those portrait worksheets. Um, Jessica's like very excited about worksheets. I love the worksheets, and I have them translated into Spanish too, because as a classroom teacher, I know that a lot of times we have a lot of non-native English speakers in our classes, and I want to make art is for everybody. It's a visual language. It's the only universal language, right? So I try really hard to make sure the instruction is accessible for those of you who are school teachers. They come in Spanish as well. All right, I missed a couple other questions in the chat, so I'm just double checking here. Okay, Ellen, I'm seeing a question for you, but I don't remember what I said that brought it up. So why is it that if both are natural light? Just curious. I know it's relative and warm and cool. Oh, you're talking about lights and shadows. I think that we covered that pretty well. Like there's no rules to be followed. But what's the reason why this is both warm and cool is because there's two shadows involved here. So the light is coming from this direction. This is actually a great question, Ellen. Thank you for bringing this up. All right. So there's a light coming this way, right? And the head is casting this shadow back here. And this is our warm shadow. It's our warm darks. It's casting here. But we also have hair, which is slightly transparent, especially out on the edges. So it's being filtered through this black hair. This black is a slightly cooler black, right? And it's being filtered through there onto our collar. But the collar itself has some warmth under it as well. So that's why we're getting both a warm and a cool. And this is still a little bit too warm, the shadow. It needs to cool down a little bit more. It's still a touch too warm. All right. And these are minor changes, right? These aren't big changes. I feel like I could go down one more notch here, and that the dark part can go a little bit darker too. So it has a tiny bit of red in it, but it still needs to be a dark value back here. I'm looking at the overall shape, trying to make sure, it kind of jets out a little bit here, but it's a soft edge at the same time, right? So we don't want to make it too harsh. But yeah, so the reason this is slightly different is because there's a shadow being cast, but some of that shadow is being cast by hair, which is semi-transparent. This is what makes Velasquez such a genius. His sensitivity to observation. So many other painters would have just made this all part of the white. They wouldn't have necessarily observed something that subtle. That's why I love copying Velasquez. Like if you want true color sensitivity and edges, like Velasquez can't be beat, like in my opinion. I don't know. We go through phases as classically trained painters where so and so is our favorite painter. And then, as we're focused on something else, somebody else becomes our favorite painter. But I think Velasquez has been the only painter that I've loved since the very beginning and have never fallen out of love with. In fact, I think I fall more in love with him every time I work with his master copies or see his paintings in museums. Um, Okay. All right. I think I caught up on questions in the chat. Please don't be shy. I love hearing from you. But we haven't done very much painting, and I'm really determined to try to wrap up at least the lace part of this today. I just plan on picking away at this master copy a little bit every Mandy. I call it instead of calling it Monday with Mandy, I just called it like Manday. or, or Monday, Monday, like combine Monday and Mandy. Um, I don't know. I'm being a little silly. I think that's what happens on a Monday for me. All right, so we have again this kind of pulls out, and it's transitioning very gently here. Oh, that's too dark. Just these really beautiful, subtle transitions. And that's what our underpainting really set us up to do. Because we did a direct painting underpainting, now we can scumble a little bit on top and get some of that nuance. You don't have to scumble to get nuance. It's just with this particular painting, with this texture that he's using, it's just he did it so beautifully, and because we're trying to learn from him, we're going to attempt to do it beautifully. That's too dark. Don't panic. Sometimes students will put a dark note out of order, and I'm going to pull you guys even closer because I don't even think you can see that. Okay, you can see it now. This is out of order, right? And sometimes students will panic and they'll get like the first thing on their brush and then it's also wrong and then they panic again. Rule number one, if you put a note down that's off, don't panic. That's first. Second, ask yourself value, chroma, hue. In this case, the value needs to be lighter, right? The chroma and the hue are okay, but the value was too dark. Jessica, I love that. Silly Mondays are the best Mondays. Monday, I love it. I love absurdity so much. It's okay. I love painting, and the number two is absurdity. And when I can have them both together, even better. Okay, so there's a tiny bit of darkness here, but it was too much, so I'm lightening the value just a little bit. I don't know. Some people say the internet is lonely, but I love this. I love our little group of painters hanging out on Mondays, learning together. I think that's wonderful. I'm so glad I started streaming. I was like really nervous about it for a long time, and finally I was like, just do it, just do it. I think if you're gonna be a painter, you just have to learn how to do things scared, right? If I'm asking my students to, try new things and, push their boundaries, then I need to be doing that too. It's really easy to be an instructor and disconnect from how hard learning how to paint really is sometimes. Sometimes we learn things, but we forget how we learn them. And I've tried really hard, because of my background in education, as I was getting my own atelier training, I kept extensive notes on how I was going to teach it, right? I really wanted to make sure that I didn't forget what it was like to learn. And we have a little bit more of that cold white on top up here. So I'm scumbling a little bit of that. And this is just so subtly done. I really love a good warm, cool, subtle exercise, and that's exactly what Velasquez is giving us in this. I had a little bit of hubris about this. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna paint lace for one day. We're now on day 4, right?" And I'm like, "No, for reals, we're gonna finish it today." But, we think that we get to tell paintings what we're gonna do, but they tell us what they're going to do. We are but mortals to our painting overlords. Aw, thanks, Ellen. I'm glad I started painting too. Okay. Are humans still painting? Where are the robots? That's really funny. Yeah. It's funny because people ask me about AI a lot. So speaking about the robots, right? And they're like, Mandy, aren't you afraid? Like you mix dirt with oil and smear it on woven linen for a living. Like, aren't you worried about this AI situation? But the reality with AI is that, crap in, crap out, right? AI is only successful because of the collected body of knowledge of art, because of all the photographs that humans have taken, because of all the paintings that humans have made. You can't tell AI to make a portrait in the style of Rembrandt without a whole corpus of Rembrandt paintings, right? So I'm not worried, and I think actually because of AI and because of like the truthiness and like the how everything can get skewed and manipulated online, that people, when they see a real painting, I see a greater appreciation, at least with my clientele, the people buying my paintings. I have people who have never bought a painting before that have told me that they just want something real in their life, right? So I really I think it's interesting. I think AI does some form of creativity. Creativity is often looking at lots of things and reinterpreting them in a new way. So I see AI as kind of a way to generate new ideas from old ideas, but without the old ideas, it's nothing. And it's a hungry beast. AI needs more and more images to do what they do. And as visual artists, like that's our job. We're creating. I actually think that will be more valuable in the future because AI artwork, the more it averages, becomes more the same, right? And in order to create beautiful AI work, they're going to have to go back to finding original sources again. Um, oh, they was talking about, have you seen the mistakes of AI with extra long fingers, sometimes extra eyebrows? I see that a lot. There was a little bit of a controversy in the atelier world recently because one of the major competitions had accidentally awarded an AI work, not realizing it was AI, and so it's created a lot of hubbub in the art world. I don't know if you guys have been following that, but it really brings a lot of these questions of what's art, what's AI, what's our purpose as painters to the foreground. Um, Yeah, it's funny because at first I really hated AI, and then I have a really good friend who is very, very knowledgeable about AI. And, seeing some of the things that he's been able to create makes me realize that photography didn't kill painting, even though all the painters were terrified that that technology, right, was going to kill painting. And it didn't. Painting is still alive and well. Photography had to interplay in a conversation with painting, as it evolved, but it never displaced painting. And I feel the same way about AI. It's a new technology that some artists do use as like idea generation, but it can't create anything new. It can only derive from what exists. Um, so you're gonna stand your ground. I agree. Unfortunately, we will appreciate good real art, but the majority of the population just wants crap. I assume you meant crap, not care. But you know what? Like art and painting, it's a visual language, and I hope that I'm expanding your visual vocabulary, through these Monday sessions, right? I want to help you see in a way that you've never seen before. I hope that you leave today and you don't see white the same way at all. I hope that you see the value chroma hue and that it's not white at all, right? And you know, I think about this because sometimes I feel hopeless too, right? Because the world is so visually illiterate and it seems to only be getting worse. And yet we see more images than we ever have in all of human history in just a single day, right? We see more different images in one day than most of our ancestors saw in their entire life. And but we understand less about it because we've stopped understanding and really studying what realism is. Because a camera is not the same realism. A camera is just as much a lie as a painting is a lie. A camera is taking a 3D world, a really complex 3D world, compressing it into 2D. Well, what did the camera leave out versus what am I as a painter? Like I'm working on this drapery painting in our online class. I don't know if you can see. Okay, so this is the underpainting for this drapery that I'm doing in the online painting boot camp right now. This is some bonus content, and an extra bonus lesson that we're doing there this quarter. But if I took a photo of this, it would look very different than a painting because a camera is editing down 3D information to 2D in a very specific mechanical way that it does very similarly every time. But what I'm doing as a painter is I'm using my eyes and I'm making human choices about what I'm leaving out. Now, that being said, of course, there's lots of beautiful photography out there and lots of ways to manipulate the camera. But my eyes and painting realistically is not at all the same as a photograph. If you look at a Rembrandt painting, that nose is way more dimensional than any photograph of a nose you will ever see because the what he's eliminating is intended to accentuate the form of the nose. And he made all of his painting choices and all of his elimination from what our eyes see to a 2D surface around this idea of form, right? And you can align around color, you can align around form, you can align around, any number of things. But it makes us so unique compared to cameras. And yet, because photography is so ubiquitous, it's now become the substitute for what realism is, but it's only one very, very narrow view of realism. We have all these painters that trained in a very similar way, right? Delacroix trained in a very similar way as Monet, and yet they've interpreted the world using very different editing devices, right? From 3D to 2D. We would never confuse a Monet for a Delacroix, right? So there's infinite ways that the human mind can organize and compress visual information. We have two eyes, so we're seeing in 3D, but we only have a 2D canvas. And it's incredible what's possible artistically, but AI is really, really heavily skewed to a kind of a fantasy art style, a manga art style, and a photography style because that's what it's being fed the most. And in my mind, that makes us as classically trained painters all the more valuable. We're offering something to AI that's very rare. There isn't a lot of it, and that opens up seeing to AI or to our fellow humans in a completely new and different way that they'll never get from photography or AI. Okay, I'm ranting a lot today. I have a lot of strong opinions today. um, Oh, thank you for the compliments on the painting. So the drapery painting that course will be available in the online painting bootcamp until June 1st, and then it disappears. So if you're interested in learning to paint drapery and you want to see all the content on the drapery, I encourage you to join our online class. It's $500 a month, but you can go month to month. So you can train for a month and then maybe take some time out for a while. I do it that way because it takes about a month to do a project, and everybody in the class does their own projects. It's all very individualized, right? So, I feel like a month is the minimum amount of time that it takes me to train you to get a really quality painting that you can be proud of. Okay. I'm just catching up. There's lots of people chiming in on this. Working on a bowling alley painting. I started by visiting an actual bowling alley. How unique, right? Like actually using our eyes to observe because, we're humans. We have feelings when we see. So we're not just trying to, visually extrapolate information and like beep, 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 robot and like spit it out on canvas. We're trying to get people to feel the same we felt, whatever inspired us to paint a bowling alley or paint drapery, like whatever it is, we want the people viewing it to have that feeling. And that requires a lot more knowledge about the visual world than a camera can necessarily give us. Now, a camera can be manipulated with good artistic, vision of the of the God controlling the camera, right? I'm not anti-photography. I don't want to be anti-photography. But the camera does interpret visual information in a very specific way. And even with the ways that it can be manipulated, it's still very, very similar compared to how different observational atelier training will give you, if I took a picture of that drapery versus painting the drapery, we're getting two completely different visual interpretations. And Rob's joined us. Welcome, welcome. Happy to have you here. Um, and yeah, there's a comment in the chat about we're talking a lot about AI for those of you just joining us. And right now it's easier to tell, but AI is getting better faster. And it depending on what you're feeding it, it can get more and more difficult to tell what's real and what's not. As that painting competition taught the atelier world recently. Okay, anyways, back to painting. I really, really want to get some of this cool white kind of shining through here. You can take paintings to different levels. Part of atelier training is trying to get you to take it to the highest level you can at any given point in time so that it's the choice, right? It's, sometimes things are defaults. If you don't know how to do something, then you make painting choices avoiding it, right? My goal is for all students to have the skills they need so that, what they include and don't include is a choice, not, oh, well, I don't know how to do that, so I'm going to ignore that part of the painting. It's a soft edge in there. So for those of you who maybe haven't tried dry brushing, the key is to just have a little bit of paint on your brush at a time. And to make sure your underpainting is really dry. Those are two important aspects of dry brushing. And again, a lot of the whites I'm working with right now are the cold whites, so I'm able to just use basically my titanium straight. And with dry brushing, it's allowing just a little bit of the undercolor to shine through some of that work we did earlier. I went a little heavy on the white bit. It's a little bit of push and pull. The same's true for edge work generally. It tends to be, a little bit one direction, a little bit another. There's a little bit of warmth kind of separating this white from what's around it. And it's a soft edge, so I'm going to have to get some of that dark back and push and pull a little bit on that. to get this edge as soft as I want it, because this dark actually continues. And we talked a little bit about this, but there's a little bit of sinking in going on here, meaning that even though I painted this dark bit before um, it dries light, that's called sinking in. And there's a little bit of, soft edge on this back, so I'm just softening this edge. It's very atmospheric back here. We don't want sharp edges kind of distracting. And it looks like the background could probably be a little bit darker back here, but I don't want to mess with that today. I want to stay focused. This is the thing. I advocate this a lot for my students, especially in the online painting boot camp. But have an idea of what you're doing and try to develop the discipline to focus on it. Sometimes we have a painting going in a good direction and then it suddenly becomes a muddy mess because we let ourselves get distracted by squirrels, right? I sat down today to paint the lace. And so I'm trying, even though it's really tempting, like, oh, this background needs to be darkened back here, that it's not it's time. It's not background time. We want to stay focused on our intentions. And today our intentions are the lace. Um, Oh, so this is a great question. So Rob's asking for competition. Can you paint from an AI generated image? I am not the god of all art competitions, so I feel like I cannot decree yes or no. You'll get different answers in the community. We allow painting from photographs somewhat broadly in the Atelier community, even though that's very contentious. And I'm sure AI is just an extension of that debate that's happening. It's really up to you. I feel like if I feed my own paintings into AI and then ask it to come up with some creative compositions, that the AI is using my own ideas to give me new ideas. So I haven't done this, but I feel like for me, that's inbounds for me as a painter. I haven't tried it yet, but I don't know. I don't want to be one of those curmudgeons that's like, boo technology and, shake my fist at kids in my yard, right? But I also want to be true to my painting self. I feel like artists get in trouble when they aren't in line with their painting values, and the values can shift over time and what they care about can shift over time, but what matters is that you're in alignment with yourself. And sometimes you try things that are outside of your comfort zone and they either get incorporated into who you are as a painter or they get rejected as, oh, that's not for me, or that's not something I want to include in my art. And so I think um, I would encourage painters to try AI and see if that's something that resonates with them. And just be honest with themselves as who they are in a painter. Like, some are going to reject it, some are going to find a use for it that helps them, organize their ideas. I don't know. I can't say definitively, but it's not going away. And so learning and discovering for yourself and setting boundaries for yourself about what you want in your painting practice, I think is what you can control, because you can't control what everybody else is doing with it. And you can't look at what they're doing with AI and then try to compete as a human with robots, right? And then feel bad about yourself. Like, that's what my biggest fear is that people are going to give up trying to learn the craft of seeing, which is really what Atelier training is, because the robots are doing the seeing for us now. That's my biggest fear. Um, okay, so lots of great comments in the chat. Velasquez was a master 400 years later. People still remember him and his art. If we could only be so fortunate. Absolutely. I mean, he truly saw the world in a unique way, and he wasn't trying to paint like anybody else, right? I think about all the multi-figure painters in the 1700s where they decided that multi-figure painting was the true high art, and all these people that would have been amazing landscape painters or absolutely gorgeous portrait artists or stunning still life painters were trying to do the thing that wasn't in line with who they were as painters. And we don't remember any of their names. I can't tell you, like, I see these paintings all the time, multi-figure French academic paintings from like the late 1700s, early 1800s. And I'm like, whatever, I don't know any of those names. And like, none of the art really resonates. Right. But Chardin, people kept trying to get him to do these multi-figure paintings. They're like, you're such a good painter, but you're not getting, the prestige you deserve because keep doing these lowly still lifes, right? But Chardin was true to himself. He knew what he loved painting, and he knew what he was inspired by. And despite all this pressure and like literal letters from other artists in the academy being like, "Come on, do a multi-figure so that you could be a real painter," he basically told him to f off. Right? Like he's like, I have real art to make. Right? That was his attitude. So anyways, I feel like be true to who you are. I have a friend that makes these like really meticulous, like still life paintings that are really intricate. And it's such a gift to watch him do what clearly resonates with him, right? Um, and greeting Kareen. So good to have you here. Um, read books, young ones, before I messes you up. I don't know. Like it can be used as a wonderful tool or it can be used to supplant your own thinking. And so I think just being intentional about how it's here, it's in use every day. But how can it help you be a better artist? Okay, I'm doing a lot of soapboxing today and not as much painting. So I'm going to try to continue working here a little bit. Some of this is just cleaning up. Like this drawing got a little out of hand here. You're always drawing. People think, "Oh, I did the drawing, now I'm doing painting." Like, no, the drawing is always a thing that you're doing. It's not something that just goes away. Okay, I do need some background color here to correct the shape of my lace. Remember last week we spent a lot of time talking about the importance of shape in creating the lace effect. It's like lake effect except for lace effect. All right, and it's kind of a cool neutral, a greeny neutral. All right. So the background will eventually get another coat on it, but right now I'm just trying to get the shape back in line. Whenever you make adjustments, don't make adjustments in isolation. When I'm looking at this shape, I'm not just looking at this line, I'm looking at how it relates to the whole. I'm looking at how this angle might be cutting through the face. So I'm continuing to work the shape a little bit. It looks like this needs a little bit of work here. This has some warmth coming through here. So the shape work is never really done. You refine, you refine, you refine, you get closer, closer, closer. Looks like this little white bit needs to be moved over a touch. Sometimes, you know, you have to decide how close you get. Some people, they want to get as close as they can and they'll spend, on this pass a whole lot of time on every shape, just getting it just right, which is valid. I'm still kind of focused on the warm cools right now. That's like my big idea. And so I really want to get that idea down. And then, once I get the rest of everything painted, doing a finishing pass all the way through, um, really tightening up everything at the end is how I prefer to work. That's not to say that you don't want to be careful as you go, only that the really, really small cleanup pass I like to do at the end. Oh, I've been ignoring the chat for a little bit. All right, so there's some love for Sargent in the chat. Absolutely, Leola. I'm a big fan of Sargent as well. One thing that I really love about Sargent is his ability to abbreviate complex things with a small number of brushstrokes, right? If you read his journals, like he was actually really sick of painting portraits, but it was his pot boilers. It's how he made all his money. It's what gave him entree into society, right? He was painting all these really well-known people and that fed itself, right? You get a commission in one type of painting, you get more and more. I once painted peonies that I had two different collectors fighting over. So I sold it to one and I promised to make another peony painting for the other. Well, as I was painting the next one, another collector was like, "Oh, I want that painting." I'm like, "Well, sorry, this is for a different client, but I'll make another peony painting." And I kind of call it my peony purgatory period because for 2 years I did nothing but paint peonies. Like I got like a 6 foot commission of peonies. I had like these little commissions of peonies, right? But sometimes you get like down a track. And so what happened to Sargent is that he was painting all these people, but all these society portraits, he was really over it, right? And he figured out basically how to do a full-on painting of a society person in one day, right? And if you look at the way he abbreviates clothing, he basically has a base color down, a highlight color, and a shadow color, right? But it reads really well because he abbreviated well, and he learned how to abbreviate well because he was very motivated to make the most society portraits in the least amount of time. Right. But then when you look at some of his watercolors, especially the ones where he was camping, they're very intricate, very detailed in a way that his portraits are not. And yet his portraits still read beautifully because the big ideas are all in place. Um, so Ellen's saying, I'm thinking you have to be really good at detail before letting go and loose, but capturing the values, shapes, etc., that really matter. I could be wrong, but just learning it, it seems that way. Yeah. So if your big ideas are right, like it wouldn't matter how subtly I was doing the warm and cools if they were over here, right? We would lose the likeness, right? So painting is about getting the right note in the right place at the right time. Right? I think that's true for music as well. That's something my uncle's the music teacher, and that's something he used to always say, right? But the right note means the right value chroma hue in the right place, where it belongs on the canvas. But when I say the right time, I mean we want, it would be the wrong time to work on the details if we weren't confident of the placement, right? So getting it in the right order. Ellen, I do have some of the peonies on my Instagram at Mandy Fine Artist. If you want to look at them there, you can see some of those there. I did not do the best job documenting because I was so busy painting peonies. Okay, all right. we're actually out of time today, and I really wanted to be done with the lace. Am I done enough? I'm going to work just a little bit longer working on some of the light value. I really want this play of warm and cool. That was what I set out to do today, and that's what I'd like to accomplish, because we have some really beautiful cold whites to get in here, especially right across here. And again, I'm scumbling. Now, scumbling only works when what's underneath it is dry. So I do have to be careful because some of the areas in here are a little wet. Right, and that's why you have to make choices sometimes. Like, what are you working on right now? Because if I start changing all those shapes, and then I'm gonna have a wet underpainting and I can't do the warm cool. So right now I wanna do the warm cool, so that means I need to let go of my detail pass. It's not its time, not yet. And because we did all this beautiful setup, you know, with the warm and cool underneath, we can scumble really beautifully on top. It's just a really beautiful effect. I'm so happy I copied this painting. I love it. I can't wait to continue working on it. We do have a little bit of coolness up here. I'm going to switch to but again, I put this in and it's going to start limiting my ability to scumble up here. Okay, we kind of have this sweeping. There's a little bit of scumbling right here of this cold white. But, this play of the warms and cools is what's really giving us the beautiful effect that we want in this lace, this believability. And it's not coming from painting every little hole in the lace. It's coming from the shift between warm and cools and getting our shape well situated. And we can certainly refine, the silhouette a little bit more, but it's not time for that. We have a little bit of warmth over here going back in space. And the same up here. Okay. I also want to get a little bit of that cold white up here. By the way, for those of you joining us live this morning, thank you for being here. And also, I am going to be guest hosting Art School Live at noon Eastern Time today as well. So in just 2 hours, if you haven't had enough of me yet today, I will be on Art School Live, which is a great channel. If you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe this channel. We go live every Monday at 9 a.m. We also have a second channel called the Da Vinci Initiative that has some drawing-based content. So if you're curious about Atelier drawing, I encourage you to like and subscribe to that channel as well. I'm excited to see you guys there too. Sorry, I'm just catching up. So Rob's saying that there was a big brushstroke on a dress, like just one brushstroke, and I'm assuming he's talking about the sergeant that we were talking about earlier, and it's absolutely true. He used giant brushes. He used this giant palette. He would put entire tubes of paint like on his palette, and people would be like, "Oh my God, there's so much paint!" And but he knew like that he would use it all in a day. He must have had a very strong painting arm. um, let's see here. I'm going to there's just a little bit of cold here that I think is just going to really bring this part of the color to life, and then I'm going to call it for today because I have another demo to prepare for that I gotta do this afternoon. Just a little bit of brightness down there. Okay, I'm really happy overall with the way this is going. There needs to be a softer transition over here. It's got a little too white. It's slightly more neutral. Oh no, look what I did. See, this is what happens when you rush at the end. I forgot that there was some dark underneath there. Don't see, I started to panic and then I put another wrong color down. Be patient. Okay. I'm feeling much, much happier with that. Eventually, I'm gonna have to really go up and down this whole silhouette and just really tighten it up, but that's not a today problem. That'll be a final pass problem. Um, okay, so next Monday, we'll start picking away at some of these facial features up here, talk about some skin tones, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, Ellen, today I am going to do the demo on our school live because our artist, the scheduled artist won't be able to make it on Monday. So today, because today is Monday, because today is Monday with Mandy. Um, so I will be giving a demo at noon today on Art School Live, but I will be hosting every day this week, and we will have guests Tuesday through Friday. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, I'm just making sure I didn't miss any important questions here. Thank you all for joining us today for this painting demo. It's always delightful to see you, and I hope to see some of you later this afternoon, and if not, next Monday. Again, please make sure to subscribe and like to this channel and also the Da Vinci Initiative channel. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, all of our best resources, I'm writing a ton of blog posts right now on different materials, different how-to tutorials, so make sure that you're on our mailing list so you get access to all of those. There's a link for the mailing list in the description of this video, so please check that out and join. And I hope to see you all this afternoon. Take care. Toodles.